Welcome to the LSAC Candidate Webinar Series. This series of webinars is designed to provide candidates with information and tools to navigate through the law school admission process and to provide relevant information and insight into legal education and beyond to careers in law. I am Giselle Joachim, Director of LSAC Ambassadors and Education Program Development, and I will be hosting our broadcast. Today, I am happy to host a panel of admission professionals to discuss the meaning and importance of professional behavior during the law school admission process. Our panel, along with a number of LSAC staff, is also here to answer questions. So please utilize the Q&A box to submit your questions, and we will do our best to answer as many as we can, either online or through our live discussion. It is my pleasure to now briefly introduce our panelists. Monica Ingram is Associate Dean of Admissions and Financial Aid at Cornell Law School. She earned her BA at Grambling State University and her JD from the University of Texas. Monica practiced law in the area of public education prior to becoming an admission professional. She served as the Assistant Dean of Admissions and Financial Aid at the University of Texas School of Law from 2002 until 2015, when she joined Cornell Law. Dean Ingram is committed to public service and volunteerism and has served on various boards, including the St. James Episcopal School Board, the Austin Children's Shelter, and as an American Corporate Partners mentor to military service members transitioning from active duty. Welcome, Dean Ingram.
Thank you so much, Giselle, for having me, LSAC and the broader Prelaw community. It's a pleasure to spend this afternoon with you, at least a little bit of it. Thank you.
Matt Sella began his career in law school admissions in 2012, where he served as the Associate Director of Admissions, Innovation, and Communications for Brooklyn Law School. In 2015, Dean Sella joined Villanova Law and assumed his current position as Assistant Dean for Admissions in 2018. In addition to his role in admissions, Dean Sella serves as Villanova Law's Street Law Program, a pro bono program that seeks to advance justice through classroom education and empower young Philadelphians with legal and civic knowledge, skills, and confidence to bring about positive change for themselves and others. During his tenure as Assistant Dean, he has expanded diversity pipeline programs with local HBCUs and K-12 schools. Welcome, Dean Sella.
Thank you, Giselle, and good afternoon or good morning, depending upon where you are in the country and world. It's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to talking to everyone shortly.
Terrific. And Rebecca Scheller serves as Associate Dean for Admissions and Financial Aid at the University of Wisconsin Law School, where she focuses on engaging with prospective students through national and statewide forums, admission panels, and one-on-one sessions to identify and recruit talented and diverse law students consistent with the academic mission of Wisconsin Law. Dean Scheller earned her BA at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and her JD at the University of Wisconsin Law School, and practiced in the areas of business and real estate after law school. She then joined Wisconsin Law as Assistant Director for Admissions and Financial Aid before assuming her current position. Welcome, Dean Scheller.
Thanks so much, Giselle. Thanks for inviting me, and a quick hello to the couple thousand candidates that we have on today's webinar. Welcome.
Wonderful. So to open our discussion, I'd like to ask each of our panelists to say a few words about the admissions processes at their respective law schools. And we'll begin with you, Dean Ingram.
Thank you. Well, I think our process is fairly straightforward. Now, I say that knowing that there are roughly 5,000 of you in the audience who think just the other way. So I will say that it's a comprehensive review process. We consider all aspects of your application, your academic record, including academic trends, diagnostic indicators, those as evidenced by your standardized test, extracurricular activities, including leadership, community service, public service, your writing expertise. And then I'll also say that there are some unwritten qualities that we evaluate as well, including judgment, how you interact with admissions professionals, staff, things of that nature. We have a faculty and administrative staff review process. We have an web-based interview component that is extended by law school invitation only. We have students currently participating in an alternative test pilot, and those students admitted to the law school under the alternative test are reviewed completely by our faculty review committee. We actively use what we call a wait list, or what we call a reserve list, which you call a wait list. And applicants who do not receive an admission offer have been reviewed multiple times. And good luck. Good luck.
Thank you, Dean Ingram. We're definitely going to come back to some of those topics, including wait lists and your interview process. So we'll look forward to deeper dives on those. For now, Dean Sella, let's talk about your admissions process at Villanova.
Yeah, in terms of the review process, it's very similar to what Dean Ingram mentioned for Cornell, but I'll go a little bit into more of the process. So at Villanova, we require candidates to have a valid LSAT or LSAT Flex score, which we don't evaluate differently. Within the past 5 years, at least one letter of recommendation, but strongly encourage candidates to submit to up to 2, and they can submit up to a maximum of 4, a resume and academic transcripts from undergrad and beyond. Our application becomes available on September 1st and used to close on April 1st. However, last year, we extended it out to July 1st after a law review article by Aaron Taylor, who is the executive director for Access Selects, that showed 43% of Black candidates and 36% of Latinx candidates were applying in March or later. So we wanted to be very mindful of who we were potentially excluding from consideration by virtue of our deadline. Therefore, we sort of have this pseudo rolling admissions process where we begin evaluating early and rendering decisions on candidates beginning as early as November, but reserve some seats in the class for people who apply a little bit later in the process. Additionally, we offer 2 rounds of binding early decision, with the first deadline being December 15th and second in March 15th. And in addition to engaging in a holistic admissions process, like all of my colleagues on this panel, we also have implemented an interview component, which is by invitation only. As of today, we conduct about 600 interviews in a cycle with a 3 to 5 year goal to offer 1 to every candidate we are considering as a required component of the admissions process. And nearly every candidate goes through at least 2 rounds of review by our admissions committee, which is composed of staff members in my office, in addition to some faculty members, and give a decision within 8 to 12 weeks after their application gets marked as complete. That being said, we always try to under-promise and over-deliver so that many candidates will receive a decision earlier than that timeframe. And that's sort of a broad overview, Giselle.
Thanks so much. Dean Scheller, let's hear about University of Wisconsin law.
Great, thanks so much, Giselle. A lot of parallels with both Cornell and Villanova. We do offer an early decision program with a deadline of November 15th. We then promise students a decision by December 15th. So that's kind of one distinction there. But otherwise, again, a lot of parallels with these other 2 schools in that we look at the numerical credentials of each candidate, including the LSAT score as well as the LSAT Flex, which we do not distinguish between during this current admission cycle. We do not take the GRE. We are an LSAT only school, so there is one other difference there as well. We are largely looking at bringing in a class from all kinds of backgrounds, and that's really essential to putting together the different diverse perspectives that help to create that robust exchange of ideas in the classroom. So for some students, that might be a standout volunteer record. They may have a really compelling work experience. They may be veterans from the military. They may bring diversity in other ways, including racial and ethnic diversity, or perhaps viewpoint diversity, students with disabilities. All of these different types of perspectives really help us to, again, weave that fabric, that creates the vibrant classroom experience that we seek for our students. As a state school, we do have a slight preference for Wisconsin residents. The past couple of years have been majority non-resident, and in the most recent years overall, it's been about a 50-50 split. So that is one distinction between my school and the other two schools that are on today's webinar. We also take a very close look at the writing sample that's provided by LSAC. So that is something that is important and certainly not overlooked in the admissions process. Writing, of course, is a big component of success in law school. And then we also require 2 letters of recommendation. So that's another really important element of our admissions process, where we look to see, is someone able to attest to the candidate's work ethic, abilities, and of course, professionalism, because that's a big piece of our admissions process as well. Thanks, Giselle.
Thanks so much, Dean Scheller, and what a perfect place to end on professionalism, which is, of course, the topic of today's discussion. And so what we hope to do with the rest of our time here is to have a discussion that will involve all of our panelists. So let's delve into some specific areas where students have the opportunity to display professional behavior in the admission process. And I think we can start with a timely discussion about virtual or Zoom etiquette, as it's been known, and what might be the expectations for prospective students who meet with you virtually. And maybe we'll start with Dean Scheller since we ended with Dean Scheller.
Sure, absolutely. You know, I think this has really been a wild ride for all of us in the admissions world, having to move our experiences to the virtual setting, as it has been for many different industries. With Zoom, I would say that a lot of the same rules apply, whether it's Zoom, you know, virtual, whatever the mechanism is for those interactions versus the in-person experience. And that is, of course, that students should definitely be on time. They should be prepared to ask good questions and perhaps even have questions asked of them. I think some of the important things that are different that sometimes we are struggling with when we're seeing students right now is perhaps even the attire. Again, students are about to embark upon a professional school experience, and so they should be appearing as though they're ready to do so rather than in pajamas or in other kinds of attire. And maybe I should first point out, Giselle, that they should be wearing a shirt no matter what, because there's been that experience as well. So clothing, being professional and polished, that's an important thing. No music blasting in the background. One thing that's often helpful, as you can see here, is a Zoom background. Those are pretty easy to get. Sometimes that can help if you do have some distracting things kind of in the background. But the biggest thing is that with this virtual setting, there can be so many distractions. And so you should really find a place where you can focus and be ready to be in that professional kind of interaction.
Terrific. Dean Scheller, maybe something to add to that. And in particular, I know Dean Scheller sort of touched on it's very much the same as in person, but let's focus on in person maybe. What are the other things that you might look for in terms of professional behavior?
Yeah, so certainly for in person, it's going to be slightly different than virtual, right? Because you control what we see through this Brady Bunch square. So while a jacket and a blouse or a tie and a shirt might work well here, you also have to be mindful of the bottom half and no sweatpants or shorts. It's not going to cut it in an in-person meeting. Otherwise, you know, what we are looking for in terms of level of professionalism is just the same in terms of being mindful of your time, your appearance, but also, you know, doing your due diligence in terms of the context of what you're meeting about. I think there is a different expectation when it comes to an informal informational meeting compared to an interview. I don't mind as much if someone's wearing casual or business casual, if it's a recruitment fair, or if it's going to be sort of a one-off meeting. But if it is an interview that we are conducting, or if you're going to be meeting with faculty members and others, there's an expectation that comes along with that in terms of the attire that you do have on, at least being business casual or more.
Great. Dean Ingram, anything to add there?
I think both of my colleagues have captured most of it. Dean Scheller, in particular, when you're talking about an informational in person, I think that one of the things that gives us pause is when we have candidates that are looking essentially for FaceTime. If you see me in person, you'll like me, and then that will create a level of attachment with my application. And it may or it may not, but what's more important is that the interaction be substantive. Time is precious, both yours and mine or whomever else that you may be interviewing with. So make the most of it. Come prepared with a series of questions or inquiries that's information that's not readily accessible somewhere else. And then be on time, and then understand that how that interaction should ultimately inform what your next steps are. So for example, if you've had an informational interview and then you put in an application that isn't even reflective of the information that you've been given, one, it's a waste of time, but to the extent that you were trying to build rapport with whomever you're interacting with, you've just undermined it. And so those are the things that I would be cautious about. If you ask for an interview and instead you're offered to interact with someone else, don't take that personally. I think all of our calendars are pretty much consumed with Zoom. Sorry, that's too much alliteration. And so sometimes we just don't have the bandwidth at the time that you're looking to interact. And so being offered an optional staff person to engage with is not a negative. You should see it as a positive.
That's great. So Dean Ingram, don't go anywhere, because both you and Dean Sella mentioned formal interview processes with your school. So I'd like to dive into that a little bit and describe sort of professional guidelines. Does that differ from the information you've just given? And sort of what happens at those interviews sort of in that professional framework?
So for our process, we offer a optional, meaning that you don't have to complete it if an interview is extended to you. It's web-based, and you can't request it. So I try to say that so that you understand when you ask for it and someone declines, it isn't personal. It's just extended at the option of the program. We don't share guidelines, largely because I want to get a sense of how well you think, what type of judgment do you exercise? Do you come prepared for an interview looking, if not professional, well put together? And if you don't understand what that means internally, there are a couple of options. One, reach out to the law school, just ask, is it okay if I wear X, Y, or Z? May I use a Zoom background because I'm doing it from my dorm room, it's messy. We're happy to provide that information. But if you don't think about it from this perspective, if I were engaging with you today in my Calvin and Hobbes PJs, would you think less of Cornell's program or more? And if the answer is you would think less, then turn that around, internalize that. We have a series of questions that we ask that you do not share, not because they're super secret questions, but because the goal of our interview is a little bit different. And I think each school has their own program. I don't want to get a sense of what you look like or how you come across at your most polished. I have an application for that hopefully has been through a significant editorial review. I want to see how you think. If the assumption is that every question that is asked by a judge of an attorney or every issue that's brought by a client before you, you're going to immediately know the answer to, you are sadly, and your career is going to be very disappointing. How you address issues and questions that you don't know, I think, are more important. And that's how our interview process is designed.
Great. Dean Sella?
Yeah, certainly. I just want to say that if Dean Ingram did come in with some Calvin and Hobbes pajamas, I might think more of Cornell's program, but that's me personally. So, I mean, our interview program is by invitation only. Again, I mentioned earlier that we want to be able to make this a fully required component, but we don't currently have the bandwidth for it, but we still do a large number of interviews at about 600 in a year. In terms of guidelines, first and foremost, Dean Ingram said this before, and I can't agree with it more. Be respectful of the interviewers and institutions' times. Our interviews take approximately 30 minutes, and we prepare thoroughly for each of them, thinking carefully about the questions that we want to ask. And each interview is different and dives deep into a candidate's decision-making processes, from their choice of undergrad, post-grad job, extracurricular involvements, and more. So really familiarize yourself and refresh your memory with the contents of your application, because that's what we're using as the basis of our interview. In terms of guidelines, just and some advice, be mindful of your nonverbal communication. It's readily apparent if you're browsing the internet or doing other work during an interview. I understand that Zoom events often feel as if you can multitask, and I'm sure that some of the listeners today are doing so right now. But you should be giving your undivided attention to your interviewer. And one of the small things that interviewees do that I really appreciate is when, if they ask if they can look away from the screen to grab their notebook or pull up a document on their screen when it comes time to ask questions. Subtle gestures like that really communicate someone's high level of self-awareness and high EQ. Additionally, don't be too familiar or casual. We try to make the interview process feel conversational because we want you to be less nervous and anxious so we can get to know the real you. But the questions are very much intentional and purposeful, and we still expect professionalism. Calling an interviewer, this just happened last week with one of our staff members, calling an interview bro or saying that you're hanging out with your bros is a bad sign. Don't do it. Again, dress at least business casual and be mindful of your background and do your research. You should be asking questions, as Dean Ingram mentioned before, that can't easily be found on our website. It really shows a lack of due diligence if you are doing that. You should also be knowing why you're applying to a law school outside of their location or employment stats. Stating that you are applying to a school because it's in the Northeast is not sufficient when there are 5 schools in Southeast PA, 2 in New Jersey, 15 in New York State, and a dozen in the DMV area and New England area. So just do your research and be prepared to come with questions, but also to answer questions about your application.
So Dean Sella, before we move on to the next topic, I want to pick up on your bro comment. So do students need to call you Dean Sella? Is that what is expected? And what's expected for the rest of your office? How should students address you?
Yeah, so typically this is my personal philosophy, is that until I offer you my first name and Matt, call me by what I put down, which is Dean Sella. Until then, I tell my students this all the time. Once they start classes, I'm like, you can now call me Matt. We are now colleagues. I am now your ardent supporters and cheerleaders. But in the meantime, I want to make sure that you are keeping this as professional as possible, because I want the expectation to be is this is how you're going to treat your professors, and how are you going to treat others who are coming onto campus to interview you and the like. So I typically say always start with formality, and then until someone offers you your name, you can then potentially call them that name. But certainly Dean, Mr., Ms., MX, whatever the case may be, I always say start with formal.
Great. Any different advice from Deans Ingram or Scheller? Dean Scheller?
Not at all. I think that's exactly right. And I think it's reflective of the profession as a whole. You're going to see that with judges and other attorneys. It really is best, as Dean Sala said, start with their formality and kind of work your way backwards if you are given, if that door is opened for you.
Terrific. Okay, so let's move on to the next. And Dean Scheller, we'll start with you. Let's move on to a discussion of waitlist protocols. I know this is something that's happening now for any current candidates who are in the application process. What advice can you give our audience about sort of the do's and don'ts for applicants on waitlists?
Sure. Thanks, Giselle. And I think the big message to those of you who may be on the wait list is that we feel for you. This is a really stressful time for students who are on wait lists. We know that wait lists are probably a little bit bigger than they have been in previous years because application volume has been up significantly at almost every law school in the country. So we feel for you. This is a stressful time. That said, professionalism still is so important, and it's an element that all of us remember as we go back to our wait lists, if we are able to revisit those wait lists. So I think some of the do's are to go ahead and be proactive and perhaps reaching out to the admissions office to see if there's anything additional that could be useful as they move down their admissions path and kind of make those decisions from the wait list. That can sometimes be a letter of continued interest, perhaps an updated resume, an additional letter of recommendation. Where it gets to be problematic, I should say, is when it is a barrage of contact. So numerous emails, numerous phone calls, and kind of peppering the admissions office with extreme regularity, asking those same types of questions. I think what is generally appropriate is to perhaps reach out right away, unless the waitlist email has given you instructions otherwise. Maybe check in once a month, maybe once every 6 weeks, depending on where we are in the cycle. But weekly or daily check-ins is not something that's going to, that really causes us to question your judgment as a student embarking upon the professional school experience, as to whether or not you know whether or not that's appropriate. I think a couple of other things with the waitlist is, and I know we're going to touch on this, is you are the person applying, not your partner or your spouse or your parents or a donor that you may be related to. Those people are not part of this admissions process. And so they should not be the ones advocating on your behalf if you are on the wait list. And again, I know we're going to touch a little bit about on that, but those would be, in a nutshell, some of my do's and don'ts for the wait list.
Any other thoughts? Dean Ingram?
I would just suggest that make sure that you read the waitlist offer carefully. Some schools are for an acceptance. And so oftentimes an applicant will say, well, I never heard back from you. And the comment will be, well, you never formally accepted status on the wait list. So make sure that you read your communication to know whether or not you have to formally accept. And then following up what Dean Scheller said, oftentimes in the early stages, right when you get on the wait list, there's a lot of barrage of communication. But during the latter stages, when the waitlist is the most important to the admissions professionals, later in the spring, in the summer, communication has died off. And so we're not really sure what the level of interest still is. And so pace it out. Make sure that you remain active, especially later into the summer, if that remains an interest. But if you really want to go to Wisconsin, Villanova, Cornell, or any other law school, do your hard work while on the reserve list. Don't get a reserve list, wait list call and then say, well, I need to think about, I need to visit the school first. That's a disincentive for me to extend a wait list offer at that time. You're not ready. And so that's just a factor that I would put out for consideration.
Great. So relatedly, is it proper, is it professional to submit a letter of intent, for example, to accept a scholarship or to put down a deposit with one school, but potentially change your mind if you get off another school's wait list? Dean Sella?
Yeah, so I mean, I can't speak to a letter of intent. We don't offer or have one, but I will say that if you submit anything that appears to be binding in nature, whether that be a letter of intent or a binding deposit, you should be honoring that commitment. But, all of us understand that our wait list, there's an expectation that someone probably wants to go to law school that fall and is not putting all their eggs in one single basket and hoping that they get off the wait list. So for us, we understand that there are candidates who have deposited right now that might get off the wait list to one of these other schools that are on this panel and might decide to withdraw because that was their number one choice. So for us, there's nothing binding in our deposits unless you're an early decision candidate. So you are free and welcome to accept a seat from another school if you get it off the wait list. That being said, there are some schools out there I know that have binding seat deposits or binding agreements that they have to sign if they want to communicate their intent to enroll. That's just not something that we offer. So I can't speak to it, but maybe Dean Scheller or Dean Ingram can.
Any other thoughts on that? Everybody's in agreement, I think. Dean Ingram?
I was just going to say, we do have a binding second deposit, but it doesn't affect a waitlist status. So if you're on a wait list, that is in no way in conflict with even accepting a binding scholarship or a binding seat deposit.
Great. Dean Scheller?
Yep, just reiterating what Dean Sala had said, where there is a binding agreement, you are bound to that. And if you do make those changes, you really jeopardize your own integrity in the admissions process. And so that's just something that you really need to be thinking about if you have deposited with a binding program. But otherwise, just like my colleagues here, you are free to withdraw from the class. And we expect that. We call that melt or summer attrition. And we know that that's bound to happen. There will be some reshuffling that happens So you're certainly welcome to do that if you're not in a binding program.
So before we move off this topic, I will say that from my days back in the admissions office, I actually remember that there would be some number of students who would move on to another school because they got off their wait list, but wouldn't tell the admissions office. Let's talk about that a little bit. Dean Scheller?
Sure, yeah. That's a really unfortunate thing, especially in a year like this. I think just like with COVID, just like with many of the things where we have a shared experience right now, it's so important to let us know if you are going to be withdrawing from the class, because that may open up a seat. It may open up scholarship funding for a student who was not initially admitted. So really think about your other colleagues and remember that we're all in this together, and notify the school if you do ultimately withdraw so that the school can move forward. And you might make one of your future lawyer colleagues or judge colleagues' day doing that.
Great, thank you. Okay, let's move on to the most common question that I hear, which is about scholarship offers in terms of professionalism. What advice can you give to our audience about professionally approaching law schools for scholarship funding, or in some cases, an increase in scholarship funding? Dean Ingram, we'll start with you.
Well, I think that all of us recognize it is so important in terms of financing your education. I think the initial part is an acceptance that professional school financing is not like undergraduate. Most, if not all, students may be expected to have some sort of skin in the game, have some form of financing on their own. Now, there are schools that have full tuition and fee scholarships with stipends that may cover full cost of attendance. But if they are, there's not a lot of them. And so the tone and manner in terms of how you approach the financial aid office or the admissions and financial aid office, I think is really important. One of the most important factors is don't look at this as a transaction. It's a relationship. And so even if there isn't a formal reconsideration process, it is always appropriate to what is the process, if any, for having your scholarship reevaluated. I think all of us are probably a little irritated by the term scholarship negotiation. In the true sense of a negotiation, that's not what we're having. That just doesn't operate in that manner. Most of us have finite resources that we've deployed as best we can among the class. And so to the extent that other resources become available, then do so. At Cornell, we offer a one-time opportunity to request that your application be reconsidered if you've received aid or if you haven't. But we also expect you to respect that. And typically we will reach out to an applicant who says, I'd like to have my scholarship reconsidered based upon scholarships from XYZ program. And we tend to look at peer programs and give the most weight. And we'll reach out and say, look, you only have one shot at this. Are you sure you want to move forward at this time? And the student has all of the control in the timing. But take that as a tacit offer that you don't have a very strong application. And if we only offer you an opportunity once, then moving forward with it because you have a sense of urgency at this time, and then later coming back to us when you get a subsequent offer and it's unilaterally turned down, it's because that's how the procedure is designed. So inform yourself, be courteous. Remember that your goal is to actually attend law school, and our law schools aren't very large. And so you will see these same individuals, interact with them on different levels while you matriculate. Or better yet, the relationship among law school admissions professionals, knowing Matt, knowing Rebecca, engaging with them informally, formally, we know one another. And so your reputation, and you will find as you move towards the practice, is everything. And you want to maintain it most certainly in this process, which is probably considered the most adversarial of any component of the admissions process.
Thanks so much, Dean Ingram. Any other thoughts on this particular topic? I know it's one of great interest to our audience.
I mean, the one thing I'll mention is just in these reconsideration requests, at least for our institution, we're looking to make this possible for people who want to attend our law school. There are times when people will email our admissions office asking for reconsideration, saying they're still debating on where to go. And we try to make this a financial reality for someone who wants to end up at our school. So, I usually say we are not motivated. The scholarship committee is not motivated to consider someone's offer who does not yet know if they want to attend beyond just the financial components, that if we are able to meet their financial need, do they even want to come to our institution? So that's something that we certainly look for. And I'll just add, onto Dean Ingram's points, and just remember to be respectful, kind, and courteous. And please check any sense of entitlement or ego at the door. We understand through this process that many candidates have received several offers of admission and are weighing your options as such. And understand that all schools are not the same. Some are private, some are public institutions, some have different scholarship budgets. Some have different varying employment outcomes, and they serve different legal markets, to the point that Dean Ingram mentioned before. And just like a waitlist decision, you should refrain from expressing any negative emotions or disappointment when asking for reconsideration. Again, this is a relationship, and we, especially all of us, I imagine, get to know our students quite well, not just during this process of applying to law school, but as members of our law school community and eventual alumni network, and we stay in contact. So those relationships carry forward for years to come.
Dean Scheller?
Sure. Well, my colleagues, I think, really hit the nail on the head of this topic quite beautifully. So not too much to add other than just a reiteration that law schools are always kind of recalibrating their budgets. And, it's in our best interest to really have you all graduate with the lowest debt possible. But we are serving many different students. We have many, different pools of funding that have different restrictions on them. And so oftentimes the offer that we've given you at the outset is the best that we can do at that time. Like Dean Ingram said, you can come back to us. Hopefully you're only going to come back to us once. We don't have a limit on that at Wisconsin, because we're always kind of recalibrating. But really, if you do repeatedly come back to us, that does put a sour taste in our mouths as far as the interaction that we're having with that candidate and their own kind of professionalism. Again, it is completely within reason for students to ask that we reconsider their scholarships, but as Dean Sala said, check the ego at the door. I like that, Dean Sala. Check the ego at the door and really understand that we're trying to meet the needs of many different applicants, and so there are some times when we won't be able to provide you with a scholarship that matches what you received at a different school or even comes close to that. So, it's a tricky thing, but again, reaching out to the school, even through a phone call or a kind email, that's one way to kind of get that started and find out whether or not you're able to get that scholarship reconsidered.
Great. So we're going to move on to a different topic, but before we do so, we have a question about an earlier topic that we covered that I'd like to put out there. It says, thank you for your point about titles and formality, Dean Sala. Do you think that there are cases when calling someone Mr. or Mrs., or maybe even by their first name instead of Dean, merits an apology or a correction? Like, what do you do if you sort of mess it up?
I don't say anything. I think calling, obviously you have to be mindful of gender pronouns, particularly if they're not offering it through their email signature, or if it's not something that's on a Zoom signature or something that's on the website. But that's why I always err on the side of caution, because you can see their title and you can call them by that, or you don't have to, you could just say good morning, colon, or good afternoon. You don't have to use their name. And once they offer it to you, then that makes it a little bit more apparent as to what you should be calling them afterwards. So err on the side of formality. And then from there, if you're still uncertain, just go good morning, good afternoon, colon, and then you can avoid all confusion and not have to think about this too much.
Great. Okay, so let's move on to a different topic. Are there some rules of thumb that you can share with regards to general communications? Dean Sell, you sort of touched on that a little bit in your last comment. Emails, phone calls. Do you notice grammatical errors in the email? Do you hear about communications that applicants have with other members of your law school community? And how does that impact sort of what happens in your office? Dean Sella, you want to start that one?
Yeah, our admissions department is very well connected with all of our current students, with our faculty, with our staff, with our administrators. We're in this one building. I always like to make a joke and say we're like a Walmart supercenter. It's a one-stop shop for everything. All of the classrooms, the law library, this administrative offices, locker rooms and more are in one building, and we're open 24/7. There's a real lack of anonymity, so there's a real tight-knit community. When a student reaches out to one of the people I mentioned before, you can safely assume that we're going to hear about it. And on that note, you should treat every member with respect and kindness. We have our prospective students who go on tours, and they've sometimes been rude or disengaged, and our tour guides, who are current students, inform us, and then those applicants don't receive very favorable decisions. Similarly, our students tell us about positive experience and when they believe someone would be a good fit for our community. So it's important to note that we take this very seriously. We care a great deal about the opinions of our current students, our faculty, and our administration, and we hear about those communications. They send me an email right afterwards saying, hey, is this an admitted student or where is this person in the process? Do you know this student? And to that point, on our conversation around the wait list, we know if you reach out to a faculty member after you've been waitlisted or try to curry favor with somebody else, and that gets back to us. And again, that speaks to a level of judgment and professionalism. And it's something that we note in the application when we're going to review a waitlist or someone who still has yet to receive a decision.
Dean Scheller, same topic.
Yeah, very similar. We are a tight-knit community. And so, in fact, just recently, I can give you an example. Our Office of Career and Professional Development was contacted by an admitted student who gave them probably about a 3-page email of questions relating to careers and hiring and all of that kind of thing. And I think 3 pages of questions is pretty excessive. And it kind of, my counterpart over there said, gosh, Rebecca, how badly would you like the student to come here? Because boy, this is going to take me hours to respond to this email with all of these questions. And in that particular case, the student should have either asked me to maybe facilitate an interaction with that office, or they could have just said, oh, Dean of Career and Professional Development, could I set up a time? I have questions related to these topics. I'm wondering if there's a time when I could talk with you to learn a little bit more about that process. Again, 3 pages of emails, it's a lot to have to write back on. And it really does cause you to question that student's judgment and understanding of how the law school itself works internally, because all of our offices are very, very busy, whether that's admissions, career services, student affairs. I think also some things that we see as far as typos and errors are sometimes addressing me or others in my office as the admissions staff at other law schools. And so they aren't reading that closely. And so then we know, oh boy, so you applied to the other UW Washington, which is a great school and has a great admission staff, but that's not us. And again, as far as attention to detail goes, everything really does matter in this process, especially in a very competitive year like this one. So all of that correspondence really matters.
Dean Ingram, let's pick up on that last comment that Dean Scheller made. Everything matters. Is that true for you?
I think everything matters, and especially from the candidate's perspective when they are asserting themselves in the process in a way that's extra procedural. So what I was thinking about was a constituency that we hadn't touched upon is a lot of our candidates are familiar with alumni. And some of those alumni may be very well known within the law school community. And so it's very important that you represent yourself accurately to alumni when you're having them call on your behalf. I had the dean reach out to me. An alum was curious about where an applicant was in the process, and the applicant looked great to them. And the applicant selectively provided their major GPA as opposed to their cumulative GPA, which was very different. And it's not like we're going to have a discussion intimately with the alumni, with the deans as well. The candidate isn't presenting themselves quite at the level where they are, and this is the particular status. Again, those are relationships, and it's up to you how you choose to maintain the relationship that you have personally outside of the law school. But it does call into question your judgment when it looks like you're putting tension on the relationship between us and our alumni. Because who are our alumni? there are former students, there are individuals that are actively engaged within the law school community. And so I think that that's really important. Maybe it speaks to integrity. Sometimes maybe it just speaks to immaturity and a desire so much to be in that law school, but you run the risk of sacrificing opportunity for short-term gain. And that's, you always have to think about what you want. And it bothers me almost on a molecular level that individuals who want to practice in a profession that is held to the highest ethical standards will bend every ethical rule possible to gain their own outcome. That's a problem. That's not most of our candidates, but sometimes, and I think that that's the thing that you have to take a step back. You have to temper those instincts.
Thank you for that, Dean Ingram. So before we move on to the next topic, which we're going to circle back to something Dean Scheller had mentioned earlier, we have a question about wait lists, and Dean Ingram, maybe we'll have you respond to this first, which is if you are waiting for a decision for admission to a particular school, would it be wise to send a follow-up email to the admissions office if you have not received an answer in the time frame for an admissions response stated on the school's website? So not really about wait list. You haven't gotten any decision. What's the professional way to follow up with a school on that?
So I think that if you are applying and there's a prescribed timeline and that timeline has been passed, we have a JD admissions office. That's just, it's, hello, I'm Monica Ingram. I applied X date. I was told I would hear by Y date. I haven't heard. I just want to make sure that my application has been received. And typically we will run that down. And sometimes, with junk and clutter boxes, sometimes communication goes there. Other times there's an administrative snafu and you're bringing it to our attention. Those instances are so rare and small that it's easy for us to track them down, and that's not remotely offensive.
Great. Okay, let's move on to this. And we're going to start with you, Dean Scheller, because this was mentioned in one of your responses before. Is it considered unprofessional for an applicant's parents to be involved in the admission process in some way, or for that matter, any other related person to an applicant?
Sure, exactly. Well, maybe I'll first start out, Giselle, by saying that I think that parents, partners, spouses, other family members are really important to the law school's enrollment journey, or to the law school candidates' enrollment journey. And that is because they're a part of a very important support network. Law school, as I said before, is a very rigorous program. And those people are all very important to help that student kind of navigate through these 3 years, or longer if a student is part-time. I think where it becomes perhaps inappropriate is when this other person or these other people seem to be kind of driving the bus. And sometimes we see this when a law school candidate will come into our offices and they'll bring perhaps a parent with them. And the law school candidate, the admitted student, let's say, is silent the entire time. And instead, it is the mother, let's say, who is asking me all of the questions about, where should little Rebecca live? And little Rebecca doesn't like to sit in the back of the classroom. She really likes to sit in the front of the classroom to the left. How can we ensure that she, and so it goes on, and you really begin to question whether or not this candidate really even wants to go to law school in the first place, or perhaps they're being pushed by their parents. And so this is the time, and again, I know we have some non-traditional students who would certainly not have any parents or maybe even spouses or partners involved in the process on this call today, but we do have a lot that of course come straight through from undergrad to law school, or maybe who've taken a year or two off, and sometimes the parents would like to at least accompany them. I think that is completely appropriate, but now is the time, as a student is embarking upon a professional school career, where 3 years from now, they may be in a courtroom and someone's life may be on the line, or they may be in the boardroom negotiating an $80 million deal. and the parent is not going to be, though they shouldn't anyway, be in that room at the same time. Now is the time to start advocating for yourself and speaking up and asking the questions that will help you to move forward on your law school experience and your enrollment journey. And so again, I do think that there is a place for that support network for all of those people. I think that they really are important to the law school candidates journey. But as far as advocating and kind of pushing in the admissions process, I think that is where it becomes inappropriate. And so I would encourage candidates who do have other people involved to maybe have a talk with those people before they interact with the admission staff or others, just reminding them that this is that person's journey and that they'll be doing kind of the majority of the talking. And certainly if they've missed anything, that person can chime in. But again, it's the candidate's journey, not the parents or spouses or partners.
Great. Any other thoughts?
I would just say I agree 1000%, and I don't want to be the first person who says it depends. So instead, I'll say in most instances, I do consider it to be unprofessional for an applicant to involve their parents, relatives, or family friends in the admissions process, especially when it comes to admissions decisions or waitlist decisions or financial aid. When a student asks for me to speak with their parents or others, it communicates a message that they don't feel comfortable to do it themselves. And it's really a poor reflection on not just their professionalism, but their communication skills, and in many instances, their maturity. So I agree 1000% with Dean Scheller.
Great. So we have another question from the audience, and here's the question. How do you recommend reaching out to staff and faculty from the institutions you're interested in? Should they always connect through the admission staff, or can they just go on the website? Dean Ingram?
I think it's always best to go through the admissions and financial aid office. During the admitted student process, when we're hosting various events and activities, you're probably going to connect with a number of alumni and faculty. And when they extend, and staff as well, and when they extend an offer for you to reach out to them, then I think that you should feel comfortable doing so. Now that there are prospective applicants reach out to faculty all through the process, but many times they don't reply or respond. I don't think a candidate should take that as a negative. They're just very busy individuals. And when we have admitted students, they prioritize that contact. And so we try to manage that, one, to mitigate the deluge of activity. And then another, to make sure that if there's information that's readily available, that we can then provide it, because a lot of it we already have. Others is more one-on-one oriented, but please go through the admissions and financial aid office. It is so much more helpful. Your response will be so much more robust, and you'll find that there are a lot of individuals in like situations and like circumstances.
Terrific. Well, we're getting towards the end, but we have another, I think, really good question from the audience. So the question is this: do institutions check social media? Would something like a bikini picture or some other picture like that be frowned upon, be looked at in any particular way in terms of the lens of the admissions process? Dean Scheller, maybe we'll go to you with that one.
Sure. I kind of wish that I had the time to check social media. We don't really. I know that a number of schools do. A bikini photo, I don't think would be dispositive. I think that most things maybe wouldn't, but I think what we might do is perhaps let the applicant know, again, they are about to embark upon a professional school journey where integrity and professionalism are of utmost importance. And we might encourage that student to begin tailoring their social media appearances to maybe to just be aware of that a little bit more. So again, not in all cases, it would depend on what's out there, but and then yes, I would say for the most part, we don't generally look at social media, although sometimes we are tipped off, so.
Thank you. All right, we have another question to explore, and it actually works nicely with one that I see from our audience. And that is, I think we all recognize that our participants may be a bit unsettled about expectations as we slowly return to more in-person interactions. I think we all are feeling a little bit unsettled about that, maybe in every area of life. So if you can provide some advice about that, and the specific question I think is a good jumping off point for that, and that is, what about handshakes? So what should people expect as we start to meet in person again? Dean Sella, you want to start this one off?
Yeah, and I have a different take on this because we were really fortunate at our institution to have in-person classes for the fall semester and be able to host tours that you have to have a negative test, so we had a student visit today, an admitted student, face masks and socially distance, and there was the awkwardness in the beginning, and then it's like, do you do the elbow touch, do you do the handshake? And for us, we just say keep at a distance, just say hello. We'll be very mindful in terms of, sorry, we can't do that. But in terms of the transition back to in person, while the pandemic is still happening, I think there's still the same levels of professionalism that we expect before the pandemic, and the levels of professionalism that we expect during these virtual interactions still remain the same. So I would say, typically, as I mentioned before, is default to professionalism. Here, just default to not touching individuals when we first get back, and just know that that's going to be commonplace. And many institutions, especially as we move forward to orientation for most law schools in August, are likely going to lay out those guidelines for you, or if they're able to allow visits, lay out the guidelines ahead of time so generally what those expectations are.
Great. Any other thoughts on that topic? Terrific. Well, we are in our final 3 minutes, which works out perfectly because it gives each of you a minute to share any final thoughts you have. And so let's begin with Dean Scheller.
Great, thanks so much, Giselle. Yeah, I think, overall professionalism, it's tricky when you are in a high stress kind of environment, such as applying to law school or applying to any sort of higher education program. And so we know that, there's a lot of uncertainty that comes with all of that. And so sometimes, when people are stressed, things like professionalism can go out the window or not be paid as much attention to, I guess I would say. But really, this journey is all a part of you growing into a profession that expects a certain degree of professionalism, certainly honesty, integrity. That's all kind of part of it. Timeliness, as we touched on at the beginning of this. And so again, as I said before, in 3 years, you are going to be perhaps in front of judges or helping to draft very important contracts and working with attorneys to secure major deals and all of that. And I would say that's something to kind of keep in mind as you are going through this journey, is thinking about the things that we all discussed here today, those elements of professionalism throughout the process. Again, maintaining that honesty and addressing people in appropriate ways and being prepared for Zoom meetings or in-person meetings. All of that is so important. And you will learn from it and grow from this process. And that will help to launch you into the next piece, and that is your law school journey. So I would say if any students have any questions, one thing that you can do to make sure that you're on the right track, at least with professionalism in this process, would be to just call our admissions offices. As Dean Ingram said before, that's often something that in itself can be a very impressive thing, because we most often are just getting electronic communication at this point. So just call us and ask us if you have any questions about, what to do or what to wear. Any of those kinds of things will be helpful and will ensure a seamless professional aspect to your admissions journey.
Great. Dean Sella, final thoughts?
Yeah, I guess I'll keep it a little bit lighthearted in the fact that I understand this can feel like an emotional roller coaster of a ride applying to law school, especially at a time when applications are so high. There's many more applicants in this process. And I just want to say, for those that get back certain decisions, whether they be admission offers, waitlist decisions, or denied decisions, those are not indictments or personal reflections on your value. You know, a waitlist decision does not mean that a school does not believe in you or your abilities to be successful in their classroom. A denied decision does not mean that a school doesn't believe necessarily that you cannot perform well and be a contributing member of their community. So know that the person that you are right now does not change based upon any of the decisions that you get. You still have personal value. So, you know, throughout this process, we understand that emotions are high and you invest so much of yourself into this process. And when you get back these decisions, they can feel personal, but make sure to detach the emotion from them and know that at all times, professionalism is paramount. And we want the best for you, regardless if you attend one of our institutions, regardless if you are admitted or not. You know, the reasons why we do the work that we do is because we love to see students and become incredible attorneys and be advocates for others and be great members of the bar in 3 or 4 years' time. So just try to remember that and hold on to your why and why you're doing this, and not view this whole process as stressful as it is in a negative light.
Dean Ingram?
So often everyone asks, what can I do to, to stand apart? How can I stand out in the process? And professionalism is a really big part of that. I don't have really any concerns. I second everything that my colleagues have just said. I will say that it is important to keep in mind that law school isn't the ultimate objective. It's to become an advocate and choose to practice in the way that you so choose. Hopefully, after you've gone through one of our programs, successfully passed the bar and have gotten on your professional journey. It's about relationships. And I think that if you're willing to put in the work right now to sit and talk with us for an hour with 4,900 and so of your other closest friends, that you're already a step ahead in the game for a lot of other candidates. And you need to know that what you have to offer is enough. It's enough. Take in the advice that we've given, think it through and execute, and know that we're actually here to help. And that's ultimately our goal. Our staff, our team, the greater law school communities, the Law School Admissions Council, we're here to help and to make this process as supportive and uplifting as possible.
Terrific. Well, as I fully expected, this has been a really engaging panel. I hope that the audience found it that way as well. And I want the audience to join me in thanking Deans Scheller, Ingram, and Sella for giving us such great information. And I wish you all a great evening. Thank you.